Ooh boy, follow the money. The breakdown starts now. Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson, and we have a great show for you tonight. We have New York Times correspondent and author of the best-selling book, Insurgency, Jeremy Peters, with us in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. Rick, I don't know if you've had a chance to read his book. It is fantastic.
It's amazing.
It's so good, and the way he tells the stories, it takes me back to a time where I was fully enthralled and fully involved in the Republican conservative Tea Party circles, and I'm like, oh my God, how much of this was I a part of all of it? It's
I think this is going to go down as one of the great histories. I think Jeremy Peters and Tim Alberta's histories of the collapse of the GOP are going to go down as two of the sort of seminal texts of watching a party transform itself from something that we recognize and grew up with and to something very alien.
Yes, and the sourcing is amazing. Immaculate. It's impeccable. So I'm excited to talk to Jeremy about it in a little bit.
Glad he's on.
But before that, a lot has happened since we were all together.
As it does.
As it does. We had a little Super Bowl happen. I had no investment in it because the Giants weren't in it, but I was glad to see Matt Stafford get a ring, and I love Cooper Kupp. He was my number one pick in my fantasy league this year, and he took me into the playoffs. So I was happy to see that happen.
I was happy to see what I consider to be one of the greatest halftime shows of all time.
You and I have differences of opinion on
I'm
that.
aware of this. I know that Prince. I know that Prince is like a separate category that's just off to its side. But you know,
I got a whole thing going on Twitter about this because even though I'm a Gen Xer, I grew up on 90s hip hop, but I'm an East Coaster, so I'm a little partial to East Coast hip hop. However, I give props to Dre and Snoop, and I love Eminem. I love Mary J. I just could have done without some of them. I thought it was too many acts crammed together, and I thought the production wasn't great. But that was just me being hypercritical. Lots of people loved it, and more power to them. I just was just like, it was okay. Anyway, I know I'm going to get more at me about this, especially since I said I'm not a Beyonce fan in one of the Twitter feeds because people were like, "What about Beyonce?" I was like, I'm Team Riri, and I think Lady Gaga is better. So, anywho, but that's enough about that. Don't get me
into this. Who am I, John Heilman?
Right, with the Wu-Tang. We could talk about the Wu, but that's the Wu-Tang did a halftime show. That would have been a different story. Now that would have been epic. But anyway,
I once put in a slide to a candidate talking about opposition research. Protect your neck.
Yes.
He didn't get it.
I smoke on the mic like smoking Joe Frazier, the Hellraiser, raising hell with the flavor, terrorizing jams like troops in Pakistan, swinging through your town like a neighborhood Spider-Man. What are we on, Ari Melber show? Right. I have Ari Melber. You guys, bring me back on the show so I can quote some Wu-Tang lyrics. I did Mobb Deep last time I was on.
Nice. Well played.
Anyway, and I had a lovely Valentine's Day. I hope everybody else did too. And what was going on over the weekend? Well, a couple of things. What is happening in Canada? I saw the trucker story, right, a couple of weeks ago, and I was like joking with one of our consultants who lives in Canada, and I was like, what's happening up there? Like, what is going on? And I thought it was just a little thing, and it turned into this big protest that blocked the Ambassador Bridge. It was interfering with $300 million of commerce every day between the U.S. and Canada, and it's not a shock that it's being funded by some of the crazies in the United States to create chaos all over vaccine mandates. It's now bleeding into Canada.
Well, I will say this, Tara. You know, the Canadian protests they're doing in a strange way what the protesters wanted to have happen. They wanted to force Trudeau into taking extreme measures, and he's about to do so. Now, we've got on our own shores, south of the Great Maple Curtain, Rand Paul now encouraging the similar sort of thing. He wants truckers to go to Washington and disrupt the State of the Union. And, you know, look.
Good luck with that, by the way. The State of the Union in
French
Washington
government,
is locked down.
French governments for generations have had truckers and farmers who drive their tractors into Paris. They block the roads for a few days. Look, this is one of those things that will die of its own weight after a certain period. But we are certainly going to see, I think, a lot of this. A lot of the American MAGA groups and MAGA, celebrities are trying to turn this into an international cause celeb. And it's based in this very populist sort of idea that they're going to take back power from those elites who know things about the virus and vaccinations and are forbidding them from getting their cow and horse dewormer instead of actual vaccines. But call me crazy.
Well, the irony of all this, Rick, is that the very people they claim to represent in this populist movement are the people they're hurting. You know how many auto factories had to close down between Alabama and Detroit because they couldn't get the parts that they needed? I mean, it was completely disruptive to the people who they claim to represent. So the cognitive dissonance of it all is insane. And yet here they are trying to make it a national thing. And good luck coming to Washington and trying to do that. I've spent many states of the union in Washington. It's locked down. They're not going to, they will not.
Yeah, you're not getting within about 30 blocks of the Capitol, folks.
No,
good luck.
No. So get the hell out of here with that. But something else was going on too. Speaking of money, Donald Trump's accounting firm. This has broken over the last 24 hours. Mazars, remember them? That name might sound familiar because that's the accounting firm that's been preparing Donald Trump's tax records for the last decade or so. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court because they didn't want to give up the tax records. And finally, the Supreme Court said, you got to give up the tax records. So they did. Well, it pretty much is what we already suspected, that Donald Trump is full of it, that he has been cooking the books for years. You have multiple investigations, 2 of them in New York, 1 criminal, 1 civil, looking into this. And Mazars finally said, we're out. We're out. We can't justify this anymore. We can't, what did they say? We're no longer
able to stand by our assessment.
That's right. Stand by our assessment.
That was an anodyne way of saying, dear God, we're parties to massive bank insurance and tax fraud. Let us out of here.
Yes.
And look, I do think that this is one more part of the dismantling of the myth that Trump is a billionaire. And I've told this story before, but I wrote about it in 2015 when we were all starting to realize how bad this was going to be. I was in New York with a guy that I knew very well, hedge fund guy, Wall Street guy. Sat down and I said, look, Trump's a billionaire. He could fund his own campaign. And he leans back in his chair and he starts laughing. He goes, wait, Rick. He goes, I'm a billionaire.
Right.
Trump's not a billionaire. He's a clown living on credit.
That's right. And he loves debt.
And I had that moment, the galaxy brain moment. Like even I, a fairly sophisticated political consumer, was buying into the BS that this guy was a billionaire, that he had all these resources. And what we're going to see in the end, as we've talked to Mary Trump about and others, this will all collapse. It will all come down. It will turn out, he's worth a few $1 million and he's in debt up to his eyeballs, and that's that. And it won't change a damn thing about the MAGAs. They will still tell you. I mean, I sat in focus groups in 15 and 16, which is basically what broke me on focus groups, and had Republican voters go, "Oh no, I saw it on TV. He's the richest man in America."
Yeah, he
I saw it on The Apprentice. He owns he owns all in New York.
That's right.
And you would tell them, no, he doesn't. They'd be
like,
no, he does.
Yeah, ask anyone in Atlantic City how much he owns and how well that worked out. I mean, it was so frustrating to see that myth be perpetuated, but that was all part of the power of mass communication, of being able to control the narrative. And when we talk to Jeremy Peters, you're going to see where that all comes together because it's part of the collapse of the Republican Party and how that was allowed.
It sure is.
But before we do that, there's more things that have happened in the last week. So let's go to the videotape. Here's last week in the Republican Party.
This is a good one, folks.
We start with the toilet.
I'm President Donald Trump.
Most believe the president had been flushing documents down his toilet.
They can try to raid as many Donald J. Trump supporters as they want, We're just going to keep coming.
Breaking news right out of Georgia. We can't even put the evidence pouring in, Arizona pouring in.
Now we have Nancy Pelosi's gazpacho police.
The first winner of the Jesse Kelly Show Hottest Woman in Congress list, Congresswoman from Colorado, Lauren Boebert.
People at MSNBC might not be aware of this, but our country has no domestic Botox production.
Homeless people, from the people that have spoken, want to be homeless.
Why won't Joe Biden release the transcript of the call he just had with President Zelensky?
When it really hit a moment was when they were chanting F Joe Biden at the New England Patriots.
While the Biden administration, the media, and many in Congress beat the drums of war for Ukraine, there is a far more significant threat, Argentina.
I never talk about January 6th because I like my audience. I don't want them to turn me off.
Mike Pence, you're not as good as Judas Iscariot because you won't go somewhere and shut your mouth.
I think Black Lives Matters as an organization is really evil at its core. I mean, it's a Marxist, an openly Marxist organization. Two of the main leaders are witches.
We know that Karl Marx wanted to destroy the American family.
I believe an individual citizen in this country has a right to own a nuclear warhead.
But not a delivery device?
Oh, all of it, all of it. I think.
Well, Tim, what about biological weapons?
Absolutely. All of it. All of it.
Fire! My name's Martin Hyde. I'm running for Congress in Florida 16.
Goodness gracious. That was all in 1 week. All in 1 week, folks, from toilets to nuclear warheads to the gazpacho police. It's insane. And this is your Republican Party, folks. Today's Republican Party. It's nuts. And we also have foreign policy going on. We know what's happening with Ukraine, but we're going to focus on that on Thursday, actually. So, because it's a little more complicated what's going on there. And so that's why we're not talking about Ukraine tonight. Hopefully, we still won't be there won't be a war happening by Thursday, but we'll be talking about that Thursday. So don't worry, folks. I think this is a good time to bring Jeremy in because it is a perfect microcosm of his book, which is Insurgency, How Republicans Lost Their Party and Got Everything They Wanted. Jeremy, welcome to The Breakdown. We're thrilled to have you. Excellent, excellent book.
Thank you.
When you see some of the shenanigans that we point out, like we just did, where does that take you back to in your book as you were writing it and you finished it and you're like, yes, this reminds me of X?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great question because really there's anywhere you can start in the last, 50-year history of the Republican Party. If you're not careful, you can go all the way back to Barry Goldwater, and then I would have like a 1,000-page book, and no one would read that. So I've started chronologically with Pat Buchanan, but the first page of the book is actually about January 6th, because as the title implies, insurgency is the theme that's carried the modern Republican Party. It has been a story of upheaval and revolt from the grassroots of the party who felt disempowered and disrespected and frankly, they were right, and not listened to. And then finally, they were brought in and not listened to again, and had more of a reason to be aggrieved and to mistrust people in power. And you see those sentiments carrying forward from Pat Buchanan to Sarah Palin, who's in the news today for a similar reason, because she, always identified these enemies that she knew that she could really galvanize her supporters by attacking. Then you have the Tea Party and Donald Trump. And I think it's a fairly straight, continuous line that is dominated by people who really understood that the voters who would be, the most gettable for Republican candidates were the ones who felt like they were disrespected and pushed aside by the very people who led that party.
Right.
When you talk about Pat Buchanan in your book, you use the example of when he went to a factory, I think it was in New Hampshire, back in the early 90s when he decided to run. And he was really known as being this protectionist, and he was one of the first mouthpieces for this anti-immigration sentiment that was starting to bubble up in the country. And you lay out the scenario there where the factory, I think either they had layoffs or something had just happened, and the mood was very, very sullen, and the workers said to him, "Save our jobs." And that was where the light bulb went off, that there was a marketplace for that type of messaging. And I think you could say that Donald Trump took that to the nth degree.
Oh, completely. But actually, where the light bulb went off, interestingly enough, is not so much with trade or immigration for Pat Buchanan's 92 campaign. It's someplace that will seem much more familiar to people given the current climate in our country. It was affirmative action. And a lot of people don't know this. And one of the things that I report in the book for the first time, because Pat gave me access to his memoirs that he has not published.
Oh, wow.
Was that Pat was so outraged by George H.W. Bush's signing of a civil rights bill in 1991 that expanded affirmative action, that he considered that to be the last straw, that broke the camel's back. That was what he was going to run. He was going to challenge the sitting president of his own party. And the sentiments that I describe in the book that animated voters like Buchanan, voters who were drawn to Buchanan, really was it was a different set of issues back then, but the same overarching emotion, I think. And that's these people who felt angry that they had to press 1 for English on the phone. They were angry that their kids didn't get into the school that they thought they should get into, and then they blamed a minority who was getting a quote unquote free ride or stealing their kid's spot. And this was very powerful, just as people were increasingly feeling like they were culturally disconnected from the country that they didn't recognize.
Jeremy, I think that's an incredibly astute point about, George H.W. Bush, who I worked for. I was in the administration, a junior guy, but I can remember that everyone thought, Pat Buchanan, this jackass, what's he going to do? And although Buchanan, of course, was beaten in the primary, he put the blood in the water that led to Ross Perot.
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right. That was a real moment. And it was also the 1991 tax bill that Bush signed that sort of broke the high part and the low part of the Republican support for him in the country. And Buchanan was this, this paleocon, kind of almost he could be urbane on one level, but incredibly sort of like angry and almost crude on another. But that really was an interesting preview of what led to that flavor of this that emerged in its full flower with Trump.
Right, and I quote someone in the book who I think, Rick, Pete Wehner, who said to me, looking at Buchanan's remarks from 1992, because when I went back and I excavated some of this stuff, it was remarkable, not just how the emotions and the issues were very much the same, but the people. And Buchanan is there at the border in 1992. Talking about these illegals who come across the border and they kill people. They're running them over. They're drunk drivers. And he had the mother of a person who was killed by an undocumented immigrant who had been drinking and driving. But then he blamed the LA riots on immigrants.
Right.
Yeah.
And the source for his quote on why it was immigrants to blame for the LA riots was none other than the Attorney General of the United States at the time, Bill Barr.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was wrong. It's just, it was wrong.
Right.
So the people are common too. And Buchanan, when he was there in 92, he recognized the power of this issue because he could see that in California, especially, he was getting a huge percentage of the vote for a guy who's effectively dead on the ticket, right? I mean, he was not going to beat Bush. But he still was getting a third of the vote in LA County, San Diego County, and I believe Orange County, because the illegal immigration thing was so powerful.
Which led to Prop 187 later in the 90s there, which was all about that, denying illegal immigrants benefits, and that went and it was deemed unconstitutional, I believe. But that was another big rallying cry for that group of folks that carried over to the 2000s with the Tea Party and, you know, the immigration debates. And you write extensively about the 2013 immigration debate and what led up to that. The last time that there was any attempt at a real comprehensive immigration bill, I remember because I was in the middle of those fights. And you talk about a familiar villain whose name we haven't said in a long time, which I'm actually glad about, but it took me back to Stephen Miller. I'm actually glad we don't have to see him or talk about him anymore, but I thought it was interesting for you to mention how he's another one that didn't just show up during the Trump administration. He'd been around as a staffer, wreaking havoc in these anti-immigration efforts for a long time. Talk a little bit about Stephen Miller and his role.
Well, that's what, I mean, when I say in the book that Trump didn't really bring anything inside the big GOP tent that wasn't already there. He just gave it a louder voice and a sense of entitlement. What Miller is, and why I found him so fascinating as a character in this book, is he was somebody who was there all along talking about what Buchanan was talking about in '92. Mm-hmm. And he was doing so in a way that allowed the leadership of the Republican Party, especially in the Senate, to dismiss him. They weren't paying, they thought he was just some, and he was, I was covering Congress at the time, and it was very easy to write off somebody like Stephen Miller, because you'd get on the phone with him and you'd spend an hour with him, and like, what has come?
What just happened?
It was a lot of words. But he hit on this in a way that almost worked. They didn't quite pull it off, but it was a race in 2014 in New Hampshire for the Senate, where Scott Brown was doing his second bid for the Senate. Mm-hmm. And he moved from Massachusetts, and they didn't have an issue in New Hampshire, his strategists believed, that could ignite the passions of the Republican base, because Obamacare wasn't working anymore. Right. They saw that it just didn't appeal to voters, didn't motivate them like it used to. So what do? Against the better wish, against the wishes, the advice of the Republicans in Washington, they ran against immigrants. And this is at a time when ISIS was a big deal, and there was this border crisis with young child migrants. Mm-hmm. Yep. And they saw that this could be incredibly powerful with voters in New Hampshire who were nowhere near the Mexican border.
Right.
And like I said, he didn't, Brown lost, but he lost narrowly. And it taught Republicans at the time who, there was also this confluence, which I haven't mentioned up there, of conservative media like Breitbart and Laura Ingraham, who were always plugged into this stuff, who helped whip up the base even more about it. And that, I think, was really kind of one of these canary in the coal mine episodes that gets overlooked, where you go back and as I try to do in the book, interview the people who were there. They saw it. They saw it on the ground, and it's some of the same people, that you'll recognize from the Romney campaign, who were running that race. And they told me, as I interviewed them for the book, that they were shocked, going back to 2007 when Romney ran for the first time, that immigration would come up in Iowa when they visited Iowa. And here are these people from Massachusetts, like, why is Iowa concerned about illegal immigration? But it was there.
That stream of nativist, anti-immigrant sentiment. I had someone one time who was at Breitbart who told me, Bannon believed in it from the very beginning, but it was also great for clicks, which is why Ailes also followed the ball with Fox, and it became this sort of vicious cycle of the Republican establishment is trying to do this. Then the right-wing media complex hypes it into a vastly disproportionate scope and degree, and then there's a pushback and rinse and repeat. It goes on and on and on, and I think it's still going on right now. You've got I heard Jim Jordan mention the Caravans again yesterday.
Oh, for God's sakes!
Oh God, again?
A little early for that now.
I don't know when caravan season is anymore. Can I still wear white? I don't know.
When it gets warmer.
Don't
and in the fall when it's closer to the election time.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
That's right. It's a good observation, Rick, because I think that to a certain degree, one of the things I try to explore toward the end of the book is the way that a lot of the strategists who are running and running the campaigns and devising the strategies didn't really believe this wholeheartedly, and they certainly didn't believe in Trump as some type of political genius.
No.
I mean, what they saw in him was a different kind of genius, like a kind of evil genius, like Bannon says to me in the book when he watched Trump coming down the escalator. He says that's Hitler.
That's Hitler.
And he meant that's the propagandist, the guy who knew how to manipulate images to make himself seem larger than life to his followers. And they know who Trump is. I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, I didn't have quite as colorful a title as Rick for my book about the phenomenon that the fate that tends to befall these people who get close to him. But it's real. Like they get close to him and they see who he really is, and many of them ultimately suffer the consequences of that. And I think that was really that they drove it home for me in my interviews with them during the pandemic, when a number of them said to me, he's just not serious about the job of president of the United States. He likes being president of the United States, but he doesn't like doing the job. And those are two very different things.
I think that's an observation I've talked to people who were in the White House about, and you hear it over and over again, is he likes the trappings, he doesn't like the responsibilities, and you got to do both of those things to be president. We need presidents who live into the role, who grow into the role, but it's also you got to get up in the morning and take the PDB. You got to do all the work, and you've got to sit in the meetings and get the briefings. And like I saw Joe Biden give a speech today that was clearly staffed and written and carefully crafted and met all these objectives. And there were no asides. There were no but Putin likes me. He says nice things about. There was no none of the weirdness. And I think you're right that Washington consulting community, they got trapped into this, and none of them believe in Trumpism or nationalism or economic populism. Not a single one of them, but they believe in victory.
Well, I think it actually predates Trump, this misunderstanding that a lot of these consultants have of their voters, because they aren't those voters. And many of these people are very smart, and they were very good at manipulating the sentiments that roused those voters. But ultimately, they weren't conservatives. I mean, they were fighting on one level in their not so public lives a fight to, for example, expand gay marriage rights, right? Look at what Ken Mellman and Mark McKinnon and all these guys, these Republicans who signed on to the amicus brief to expand gay marriage. I mean, at the time, that couldn't have been more out of step with where the Republican base was. So there's always been a disconnect between the people who run the campaigns and those whose votes they ask for.
Absolutely. Look, I resemble that remark. I was a libertarian inflected, foreign policy, Bush-style conservative, and I didn't care about gay marriage or any of those other things that activated the evangelical base. Wasn't my world. But I think you're right that divergence and led to a lot of them having to make these terrible compromises. Look, I'm out. I'm liberated. I can say what I want to do and do what I want. Those guys in DC still, they go into these meetings and they sit with these candidates who are MAGA crazies who believe in the fire and fury. And it's just, I talk to these guys sometimes and they're just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I got a mortgage in a house in McLean.
They're hired guns. They're hired guns, and they are part of the problem. And that's how we kind of ended up where we are. with crazy people running for Congress, getting endorsements, because all it matters, doesn't matter policy, doesn't matter about experience, doesn't matter about wisdom.
Right.
All that matters is Trumpism, where you stand on the big lie, and who can out crazy the next one.
Right.
Before I let you go, Jeremy, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the role that the right-wing media has played in all this. And there was a really poignant quote in your book that I found to be apropos of kind of where we are. Back, and I remember this well, when Eric Cantor lost his primary to Dave Bratt. That was like a nuclear bomb going off in Washington. Eric Cantor was the majority leader. He was part of the Young Guns. He was, that was like, I don't think it had been an upset like that since Daschle lost, right?
Yeah.
And the quote from a Republican activist in your book, it says, "Don't discount intensity. And when you marry intensity with this media opportunity that we didn't have 10 years ago, it's powerful." That was back in when did
2014?
2014, right. So he's right. Even further back, right? And even now you look at, you didn't have OANN and you didn't have Newsmax and this proliferation of propaganda channels. All you really had was Fox and talk radio. At what point did that kind of get out of hand?
So, I mean, there's so many points at which, the line blurred between, the media, the conservative media and the conservative movement and the politicians it elevated. And I think Trump is the culmination of all of that, because I describe a scene where Trump has Limbaugh at Mar-a-Lago right after the election in 2016. And Limbaugh gives him what ends up being the advice that dictates how he governs for the rest of his presidency. And that's never, ever cut deals with Democrats. Don't go to the middle, which of course has been the prevailing political science theory for as long as I've been alive. Politicians run to the...
For both sides.
Yeah.
Right. How you get things done is how you govern.
That's where the country is.
Right.
But what Trump did was, Limbaugh said, don't ever cut deals with Democrats. They will always hate you and they will always screw you. And that, I think, speaks to what is one of the core elements of Trumpism, is it's not just about what you do and who you are, it's about who hates you or who your voters perceive hate. And that's why I think comes back to Sarah Palin, because she was so good at this. And it's what people saw about her enemies and how those enemies were the same enemies that they thought they had, the same people who looked down on them. And that's just as motivating as liking someone.
For sure.
Hatred is a much more powerful.
Oh, hatred works.
More so.
Hatred works.
Let's ask Hillary Clinton.
Jeremy, if we got one last second, what do you make of all these stories this week that are coming out about these behind closed doors in Washington? Republicans say they're taking on Trump. What do you make of all that? I mean, I'm skeptical.
Hooey.
How many National Review editorials have we read? How many Wall Street Journal op-eds? How many speeches of Mitch McConnell's from the Senate floor have there been? The only thing that is going to change the minds of these people is their voters. Their voters will tell them where to go. If their voters get tired of Trump, which I don't think is an impossibility, I don't think Trump is immune, as the book says, like from the forces of the insurgency. I think Trump has emboldened so many people who are so fringe that this could end up being a situation where he's eaten by his own, or eaten by people that he doesn't fully understand or appreciate. But I think that it's the idea that the next insurgency is going to come from the suites on Capitol, the office suites on Capitol.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
it's ludicrous.
Give me a break.
It's up there. It's exactly. It's up there with this idea that Mike Pence is somehow going to swoop in and be like the savior now because he came out and stated the obvious.
Right.
I have a piece that's coming out on NBC Think in the next day or two about this, where I basically talk about how Mike Pence needs to just stop. Okay, he has no shot whatsoever. I think there's the murmurings of this. First of all, he's got to get through a Republican primary, which he's not going to do. Never mind win the presidency. People don't vote for cowards. So
well, I would say that it's actually like the Mike Pence was done before January 6th.
Oh, sure.
Is what I argue in the book, because Trump ruined the model, obliterated the model of politician that Mike Pence represented to Republicans.
Absolutely.
And that was the social concern, one of them. They realized through Trump, they didn't need one of them to get their priorities passed because Trump just didn't care.
Right.
The embassy in Jerusalem, saying that he would only appoint pro-life justices. No one had ever done this before. And I'm not sure that Mike Pence would have done any of that. In fact, evangelicals told me that.
That's right. No way.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
He didn't have the cojones to do it because Karen had him too tightly in her hands.
Jeremy,
so
this is an excellent and an important book. I really encourage all of our viewers to go out and get a copy of it, where all fine books are sold, and really dig into it, because I've become an aficionado of the sort of cultural history of what happened to the GOP. And this, as I said, is absolutely going to be one of the sort of seminal texts of this, folks. I really encourage you to get it.
That's a really nice.
And we're really grateful for you coming on, Jeremy, and we really look forward to talking to you again soon. Best of luck with everything.
The book is called Insurgency: How Republicans Lost Their Party and Got Everything They Wanted. It's here. It's good. And Rick and I relived those glory days, kind of. Anyway, thank you, Jeremy. Oh my goodness!
Wow, great conversation too.
Yeah,
I really
it
thought that
really
was
is good. I didn't finish the whole book because I got it over the weekend, and my husband took me on a Valentine's Day weekend. So in between whiskey and ribs, I didn't read the book. Start reading the book till yesterday, but I got through a lot of it. It was really good. So before we go tonight, two things. One, our Black History Month moment. I want to get that in because that's important. Tonight, our Black History Month moment is honoring Rebecca Lee Crumpler. She was the first African-American woman to earn a medical degree back in 1864. She was only 33 at the time, but she went through a lot to get it. A lot of racism, a lot of hurdles to overcome. And when the Civil War was over, her and her husband went down to Richmond because they knew that there were a lot of newly freed slaves that needed medical care, and they weren't getting it because of racism in the South. So she went down there, she did that. She offered medical care to folks that couldn't get it. And then when they came back to Boston, which is where she got her medical degree, she continued to practice until she was in her 60s and when she passed away, unfortunately. But she wrote a book. It's considered to be the first medical book written by a Black female doctor about maternity health. And it's known in medical circles, they believe that it was the foundation for the very well-known book called What to Expect When You're Expecting, which is about basically the prenatal Bible for a lot of women. So we give recognition to Rebecca Lee Crumpler as our Black History Month moment today. All right. Now, lastly, we have a sneak preview. We have an ad because, like I said, Ukraine is going on. This is pretty significant, folks. The geopolitics of all of this is rather significant in this moment. And Lincoln Project, of course, has something to say about it. So check out our latest ad, which drops tomorrow. You're getting the sneak peek now.
It is so striking to see how figures like Tucker Carlson and others on Fox are rooting for Putin.
Vladimir Putin does not want Belgium. He just wants to keep his western border secure. That's why he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. And that makes sense. Fox host unabashedly makes Putin's case. Imagine how we would feel if Mexico and Canada became satellites of China. Right-wing agitators spewing Russian propaganda into millions of American homes. Why do I care what's going on in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm serious. Why do I care? Why. And why shouldn't I root for Russia, which I am?
Newsmax ran a cover story titled Vlad the Great.
Russia is bad.
Russia, if you're listening, I think in terms of leadership, he's getting an A. Certainly a respected leader. He's respected in his country. I think Putin's been a very strong leader for Russia. The truth is that he is strong and he's tough. Putin says very nice things about me. I think that's very nice. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
The visiting Republicans not only didn't pressure the Russian government about them monkey-wrenching our election, they also didn't really pressure them about anything else either.
So you're a Russian agent. I mean, let's not even engage in that because it's so outrageous. As they used to say when we were kids growing up in the United States, what's good for the lightly populated Russian colony of Ukraine is good for us.
It's his defense of Russia's threat against Ukraine, the Kremlin-backed channel.
now wants to highlight.
Солидаризироваться, потому что вопрос...
Excellent performance.
Disgraceful.
And that's just scratching the surface, folks. You're
Ronald
going to see
Reagan.
a lot of Republicans when the tanks roll, and if they roll, God forbid, into Ukraine. You're going to see a lot of Republicans on the wrong side of history.
Even more so. They've been on the wrong side of history for the last few years now, and now in the foreign policy space where Republicans used to thrive, they are disgracing Ronald Reagan's legacy, and he's spitting in his grave. All right, folks. Great ad, guys. That's it for us tonight.
Shout out to Kate.
Yeah. Oh, good for Kate. I like it when Kate kicks ass with those ads. Good for her. Make sure to tune in tomorrow night for We're Speaking with Lisa and Maya, and we will be back on Thursday. Have a good night.
See you, folks.